What if the most important battlefield in this war is not where missiles are launched, but where they are transported? What if the decisive weapon is not a fighter jet, a carrier, or a missile system, but a bridge that no longer exists? Because deep inside southern Iran, something has changed. For weeks, the world watched this conflict through the same familiar images: aircraft taking off from distant bases, missiles crossing the night sky, warships moving through contested waters, radar screens glowing inside command centers. But now the battlefield is revealing something different. The bridges are becoming targets. The roads are becoming weapons. And one city sitting at the edge of the Strait of Hormuz has become the center of a much larger strategic struggle. That city is Bandar Abbas, a port surrounded by mountains, desert, and one of the most important maritime choke points on Earth. A place where geography, energy, military power, and global economics collide. And the question now facing military planners around the world is this: can a country's ability to fight be defeated not by destroying its weapons, but by cutting the paths those weapons need to reach the battlefield? Because that is the mystery unfolding in southern Iran. Everyone is watching the explosions, but the real story may be hidden underneath the smoke. On a satellite image, Bandar Abbas appears almost like a natural fortress. A narrow strip of coastline pressed between rugged mountains and the blue waters of the Strait of Hormuz. To the south lies one of the most important shipping lanes on the planet. To the north lies the vast interior of Iran. And connecting those two worlds are only a limited number of highways, rail lines, and logistical corridors. This is what makes Bandar Abbas different from almost every other military target in this conflict. It is not simply a city. It is a gateway. The largest naval facilities of Iran's Revolutionary Guard sit here. The port handles critical commercial traffic, fuel, equipment, military supplies, and personnel all flow through this coastal hub. The city is where Iran's continental geography meets its maritime strategy, and that creates a unique vulnerability. Because every military system has a hidden dependency. A fighter depends on fuel. A missile depends on transportation. A warship depends on maintenance. An army depends on supply chains. The weapon itself is only the visible part. The invisible system supporting it is what allows it to exist. And Bandar Abbas is one of the most important nodes in Iran's invisible military network. But here is the contradiction. The more important a location becomes strategically, the more dangerous it becomes to attack. Destroying a radar site is one thing. Destroying a missile battery is another. But attacking the infrastructure that connects an entire region creates consequences far beyond the battlefield. A bridge does not only carry military trucks. A railway does not only transport weapons. A power station does not only support soldiers. Every piece of infrastructure exists inside a civilian world. And that is where modern warfare becomes complicated. Because the goal is no longer simply to destroy an enemy's weapons. The goal becomes deciding how much pressure can be applied before the consequences become greater than the military advantage. The story of Bandar Abbas begins long before this conflict. For centuries, the Persian Gulf has been a crossroads between continents. Trade routes, naval powers, and energy supplies have all passed through this narrow region. But in the modern era, the Strait of Hormuz transformed from a regional waterway into a global strategic artery. Approximately 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through this region. Every day, massive tankers move through a narrow maritime corridor connecting Persian Gulf producers with international markets. Thousands of miles away, traders watch energy prices move based on events happening along this coastline. A bridge destroyed in southern Iran can eventually affect fuel prices in Asia, Europe, and North America. This is why Bandar Abbas matters. The city is not important only because Iran needs it. It is important because the world economy is connected to it. The bigger picture is this: modern wars are no longer isolated conflicts between armies. They are contests between systems, military systems, economic systems, political systems, industrial systems. And Bandar Abbas sits at the intersection of all four. When the latest phase of this conflict began, the initial battlefield looked familiar. The first targets followed a pattern seen in many modern air campaigns: air defense networks, radar installations, missile positions, military headquarters, naval facilities. The objective appeared straightforward: reduce Iran's ability to strike back. And that strategy makes sense. A military force cannot effectively operate if it cannot see. It cannot launch attacks if its weapons systems are destroyed. It cannot defend itself if its air defenses are weakened. But here is the problem. Modern militaries are designed to absorb attacks. A destroyed radar can be replaced. A damaged command center can relocate. A missile launcher can be moved. The most advanced weapons on Earth still depend on something much older: movement, fuel, transportation, logistics. And that is where the battlefield began to change. The sixth night of strikes revealed a different logic. Instead of focusing only on military hardware, the campaign expanded toward infrastructure connecting Bandar Abbas with the rest of Iran. Bridges, rail connections, transportation corridors. The visual images told the story. Concrete structures collapsing, roadways interrupted, rail lines cut. The battlefield was no longer only above the ground. It had moved underneath. Because the purpose of striking a bridge is not simply to destroy concrete. The purpose is to destroy time. A destroyed bridge forces detours. A damaged railway creates delays. A blocked corridor creates uncertainty. And, in war, uncertainty is often more valuable than destruction. The missile is not always the weapon. Sometimes the uncertainty created by the missile is the weapon. But here's the problem. Cutting transportation networks does not automatically win a war. History has repeatedly shown that countries can adapt under pressure. They built alternative routes. They repaired damaged infrastructure. They moved supplies differently. A military system is not defeated simply because one road disappears. The real question is whether enough connections disappear at the same time. And this is what makes Bandar Abbas different. The port is connected to Iran's interior through a limited number of strategic corridors. The geography itself creates pressure. Mountains restrict movement. The coastline concentrates activity. The narrow connection between land and sea creates a natural bottleneck. Strategically, this changes everything. Because geography becomes part of the weapon system, the attacker is not only using aircraft and missiles. The attacker is using the map itself. The same logic can be seen at sea. Around the same period, pressure on Iranian oil movement increased. The targeting of a tanker attempting to reach Iran's energy infrastructure sent a message far beyond that individual vessel. The important question was not only, can one ship be stopped? The bigger question was, will other ships decide the journey is worth the risk? This is how modern economic warfare works. Not every battle is won by destroying assets. Sometimes it is won by changing decisions. A shipping company does not need to lose 10 vessels before changing behavior. Sometimes one incident is enough to change insurance calculations. One attack can change the cost. One cost increase can change the entire business equation. And, suddenly, the battlefield expands from military commanders to corporate executives, insurers, and global markets. The invisible battlefield becomes decision-making itself. But this creates another contradiction. The United States has enormous military advantages: advanced aircraft, satellite intelligence, carrier strike groups, long-range precision weapons. But power does not always equal control. A military can destroy targets. The harder question is whether it can control what happens afterward. Because every strike creates a response. Every pressure point creates another pressure point. And every attempt to isolate an enemy can create incentives for escalation. Iran's response demonstrated exactly this problem. Instead of limiting retaliation only to military targets, the conflict began moving toward infrastructure, power, water, transportation, systems that civilian populations depend on. And this is where modern conflicts become especially dangerous. Because once both sides begin targeting the systems that keep societies functioning, the battlefield expands dramatically. The war is no longer only about soldiers and weapons. It becomes a contest over endurance. Which society can continue functioning under pressure? Which government can maintain political support? Which economy can absorb disruption longer? The lesson here is that Bandar Abbas is not simply a port. It is a test of a much larger idea. Can modern military power defeat an opponent by attacking the connections that hold its system together? Or does attacking those connections create a wider conflict that becomes harder to control? Because the world is watching something bigger than a regional battle. It is watching a demonstration of 21st century warfare. A war where satellites identify targets. Artificial intelligence helps analyze movement. Drones provide constant surveillance. Missiles strike with precision. But victory may still depend on something surprisingly old. Roads, railways, ports, and geography. The visible war is happening in the sky, but the hidden war is happening on the ground. And that leads to the question that changes everything. Everyone thinks this battle is about missiles, ships, and airstrikes. But what if the real battle is about something much deeper? What if the true objective is not destroying Iran's weapons, but controlling whether Iran can move them at all? Everyone thinks this battle is about missiles, ships, and airstrikes. But the real battle is about controlling movement, controlling supply, controlling decisions. Because in modern warfare, the most powerful weapon is not always the one that creates the biggest explosion. Sometimes it is the one that forces an opponent to hesitate. And that is the transformation happening around Band Abbas. The world sees a port under attack. Military analyst sees something else. A strategic experiment. A test of whether a modern military can isolate an opponent by attacking the network that allows its forces to function. The question is no longer, can Iran fire missiles? The question is, can Iran continue generating military power when the systems supporting those missiles are under constant pressure? And that changes the entire meaning of this conflict. The first phase of the war was about destruction. The second phase is about isolation. And those are very different military objectives. Destroying a missile battery is tactical. Isolating a military region is strategic. A destroyed missile launcher affects one unit. A destroyed transportation corridor affects everything connected to that corridor. Fuel, personnel, maintenance equipment, spare parts, command movements. The entire military ecosystem begins to feel pressure. This is why the bridge strikes matter. The target was never simply concrete and steel. The target was time. Every military operation exists on a clock. A missile force needs preparation. A naval unit needs resupply. A command structure needs communication. When transportation networks slow down, every decision becomes harder. Every response becomes slower. Every option becomes more expensive. Strategically, this changes the battlefield because the attacker does not need to eliminate every weapon. The attacker only needs to make those weapons harder to use. But here's the problem. A strategy based on isolation carries enormous risks. History shows that pressure can weaken an opponent. But pressure can also create desperation. And desperate opponents often behave differently from rational calculations made in peaceful conditions. This is why infrastructure warfare is one of the most complicated forms of conflict. Because it attacks the systems a government uses to fight. But those same systems are often connected to the lives of ordinary people. A railway carries military supplies. But it also carries workers. A power grid supports command centers. But it also powers hospitals. A port moves energy exports. But it also supports an economy. The line between military pressure and civilian impact becomes extremely difficult to maintain. And that creates the central contradiction of modern warfare. The systems that create military power are often the same systems that keep societies alive. The hidden battlefield is therefore not only geography. It is endurance. Who can maintain pressure longer? Who can absorb disruption? Who can repair faster? Who can convince their population that continuing the fight is worth the cost? Because wars are not only contests between weapons. They are contests between political systems. A military commander thinks about ammunition. A government leader thinks about public support. An economy thinks about production. A population thinks about survival. All of those calculations collide around one location. Band Abbas. The technology behind this campaign reveals another important shift. Modern warfare is becoming increasingly dependent on finding vulnerabilities in systems rather than simply defeating individual platforms. A bridge can be identified through satellite imagery. Traffic patterns can be monitored. Logistics movements can be analyzed. Drone surveillance can provide continuous observation. Aircraft can strike with precision. The important change is not just that weapons are becoming more accurate. The bigger change is that militaries are becoming better at understanding entire networks. The battlefield has expanded. A commander in the past might ask, where is the enemy tank? Today, the question becomes, how does the enemy sustain that tank? Where does its fuel come from? How does ammunition arrive? What transportation route connects it to the larger system? This is the logic behind attacking infrastructure. The objective is not always the weapon. The objective is the ecosystem that makes the weapon possible. And this brings us to the most important strategic lesson. The lesson here is that modern military power is moving from platform warfare to system warfare. For decades, military competition focused on individual platforms. The better aircraft, the larger navy, the more advanced missile. But the wars of the future may be decided by something less visible. Which side has the stronger network? Which side can replace losses faster? Which side has better information? Which side can continue operating when the first wave of attacks is over? A nation can have powerful weapons and still struggle if those weapons cannot move, communicate, or receive support. The strongest army in the world is still dependent on logistics. The most advanced missile system is still dependent on transportation. The most powerful navy is still dependent on supply chains. The invisible battlefield determines the visible battlefield. But the conflict around Band Arabos also reveals another layer. Energy. Because this location is not only a military hub, it is part of the global oil system. And this creates one of the biggest strategic dilemmas in the entire campaign. Destroying military infrastructure creates pressure on Iran. Destroying energy infrastructure creates pressure on the entire world. That distinction matters. A military target affects an opponent. An energy shock affects everyone. Thousands of miles away, traders watch oil markets react. Governments calculate economic consequences. Industries evaluate fuel costs. Consumers eventually feel the impact. This is why energy infrastructure creates such a difficult strategic choice. It is powerful, but it is also dangerous. A strike that damages an enemy's economy can also destabilize global markets. And that means restraint itself becomes a strategic weapon. Sometimes the strongest move is not the strike you make. It is the strike you choose not to make. This is why the battle around Band Arabos is more complicated than a simple attack campaign. The United States can strike. Iran can retaliate. Both sides understand the destructive potential. The difficult question is where the limits are. Because once infrastructure becomes a battlefield, escalation becomes harder to predict. A damaged military site can often be repaired. A damaged civilian system creates political pressure. A damaged energy network creates international pressure. A damaged water or power system creates humanitarian pressure. And pressure creates decisions. Sometimes rational decisions. Sometimes emotional ones. Sometimes decisions made under political survival instincts. The geopolitical consequences extend far beyond Iran. For China, energy security is a major concern. Iranian oil exports connect directly to global energy markets. For Gulf nations, the concern is regional stability. A conflict around the Strait of Hormuz affects every country dependent on maritime trade. For the United States, the challenge is maintaining military pressure without creating a larger crisis. For Iran, the challenge is preserving strategic influence while absorbing increasing pressure on its economic and military systems. Every actor sees the same battlefield differently. And that is what makes this dangerous. Because conflicts do not escalate only because leaders want escalation. They escalate because different sides misunderstand each other's intentions. One side sees pressure. The other side sees preparation for invasion. One side sees deterrence. The other side sees aggression. And when those interpretations collide, even a limited action can create unexpected consequences. The biggest question now is what happens next. Because the campaign around Band Arabos creates several possible futures. One possibility is continued pressure. A sustained strategy of strikes, blockades, and economic restrictions designed to force negotiations. Another possibility is escalation. If either side concludes that current methods or not achieving their objectives. The temptation to increase pressure grows. And there is always the possibility of miscalculation. A strike that was intended as a warning. A response that goes further than expected. A decision made under political pressure rather than strategic patience. Modern wars often change direction, not because leaders planned every step. They change because events create momentum. And this is where the human dimension becomes impossible to ignore. Behind every satellite image of a destroyed bridge are people. Truck drivers who cannot reach their destinations. Port workers uncertain about tomorrow. Families experiencing power disruptions. Engineers trying to repair damaged systems.